When Karen showed up at my door holding a $5,000 citation for unauthorized hunting, I couldn't help but grin. What she didn't realize was that little slip of paper would kick off a chain reaction that would leave the entire HOA in absolute disarray. They believed they had total control over every square inch of this neighborhood, but they forgot one crucial thing: property law. Once I began looking into the so-called community trails they proudly marched through every morning, I uncovered something that had the power to turn everything upside down. If you've ever wanted to see an HOA get schooled on the realities of land ownership, then buckle up, how this story is for you. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to see how far our community reaches. Now, becoming the local troublemaker was never part of my plan. 2 years ago, when I moved into Green Valley Estates, all I wanted was a bit of peace after serving 8 years in the military, followed by 5 more in stuffy tech offices in Seattle. I was desperate for space and serenity. My name is Mason Holloway. I'm 38 and work remotely as a software engineer for a cybersecurity company. The job pays well, offers flexibility, and most importantly, lets me enjoy the quiet of suburban life near the edge of a beautiful forest in western Washington. On paper, Green Valley Estates looked like a dream: sleek modern homes, large lots bordered by woodland, and a calm environment. A remote, but not cut off. The HOA fees were steep at $450 every quarter, but the real estate agent assured me they covered meticulously maintained public spaces and award-winning landscaping. What she failed to mention was that the neighborhood was essentially under the rule of Evelyn Richardson, a woman who could give a drill sergeant a run for their money when it came to control. I met her during my second week here, when she appeared on my porch with a welcome basket that had more bylaws than actual treats. "We're so thrilled to have new blood in Green Valley," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sure you'll love it once you understand how we do things around here." That really should have been my first red flag. Evelyn, always impeccably dressed and perfectly coiffed, was a senior manager at a major law firm. She had held the title of HOA president for 5 consecutive years without opposition, probably because no one dared to challenge her authority. I stayed under the radar for the first few months. I paid my dues, kept my yard up to code, and skipped the monthly home meetings, which, according to my neighbor Sarah Johnson, were more like Evelyn's personal court hearings than actual community forums. Sarah was one of the rare genuinely kind residents, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher who lived 2 houses down. She would occasionally drop by with homemade cookies, just to be neighborly. "Don't let Evelyn get to you," she told me once. "She means well, but she's convinced her way is the only way." I probably would have stayed off Evelyn's radar if it hadn't been for my weekend pastime. Growing up in rural Montana, my grandfather taught me how to hunt before I was even in double digits. For me, hunting isn't just a hobby, it's a deeply rooted tradition, a calming escape, and a way to stay grounded. One Saturday in October, I discovered a vast stretch of forest near our neighborhood, a roughly 80 acres of untouched woodland with a gentle stream running through it. It looked like an ideal spot for deer hunting. Curious, I checked county land records and found that it belonged to an 83-year-old man named Frank Williams, who had moved to Florida years ago but still legally owned the property. I managed to get his contact info and sent him an email explaining my interest in hunting on his land and promising to treat it with care. He replied the very next day. "Son, I've owned that land for 50 years, he wrote. "Used to farm the clearings with my family, but my arthritis has kept me away for nearly a decade. If you want to hunt there, go ahead, just respect the land, and send me a photo if you get something nice." What I didn't know then was that for years, Evelyn and a few other home members had been treating Frank's land as their own private park. They'd carved out trails, set up benches at scenic spots, and even hung bird feeders, all without Frank's consent. In their minds, it had become an extension of the neighborhood, though they had zero legal claim to it. That fact would become extremely important very soon. One cold November morning, I set out early with my gear and rifle. I settled into a clearing Frank had mentioned as a good spot and waited patiently. As the morning light broke, I spotted a strong 8-point buck stepping into the clearing. One clean shot brought it down instantly. As I walked over to begin field dressing the deer, I heard voices approaching. Moments later, Evelyn emerged through the trees, leading a pack of 5 women decked out in pricey athleisure. water bottles in hand, casually chatting about the latest neighborhood gossip. The second Evelyn saw me kneeling beside the deer, her expression twisted in utter shock and outrage. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" Evelyn shrieked, fumbling for her phone. "This is a protected area. Who gave you permission to murder animals here?" Before I could get a single word out, she was already snapping photos, her voice rising with theatrical outrage. "This is absolutely barbaric," she proclaimed to her stunned group of athleisure-clad friends. "This goes against everything Green Valley stands for when it comes to environmental stewardship." I attempted to explain that I had the landowner's written permission, but she dismissed me with a curt wave of her hand. "We manage these trails," she snapped. "Hunting is strictly prohibited." It was at that moment I realized the HOA didn't just want to dictate what color I could paint my mailbox, they wanted control over every part of my life. 3 days later, I found an official-looking envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a formal notice from the Green Valley Estates Association. The violation? Cruel hunting activities and causing community disturbance. They were demanding a $5,000 fine payable within 30 days. At first, I was stunned, then furious. I wasn't new to HOA regulations and I knew they had zero authority over private property, especially land outside their jurisdiction. I'd hunted with full legal permission from the land's rightful owner. So I called Sarah. She sighed when she heard what happened. "That sounds exactly like Evelyn," she said. "She's been going around school telling people you're some sort of dangerous maniac. Parents are freaking out." Sarah lowered her voice even though we were on the phone. "Here's the thing, a broken bar. Evelyn has been taking her wellness groups through those woods for years. She even tells prospective buyers they're part of the community's private nature trails. I don't think she's ever bothered to check who actually owns the land." I made my decision right then. I was going to the next home meeting to set the record straight. The following evening, the community center meeting room was unusually crowded. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, flanked by her loyal second-in-command, Marcus Bennett, the HOA vice president and local government worker, best known for never disagreeing with Evelyn. Treasurer Richard Cooper looked uneasy, shifting papers in front of him. I spotted a few neighbors, including Jessica Parker, who had built a reputation for reporting even the most minor violations with overzealous pride. "Ah, Mr. Holloway has graced us with his presence," Evelyn announced, her voice icy. "Perhaps you'd like to explain why you think it's appropriate to bring violence into our community's peaceful preserve?" The tone made it clear. This wasn't a discussion, it was a public trial. I stood and held up a folder. "I'd be glad to clear things up," I said calmly. "First off, I was hunting legally. I had a valid state permit and explicit written permission from the landowner. The property in question is not part of Green Valley. It's owned by a gentleman named Frank Williams, who lives in Florida." I walked forward and placed copies of my hunting license and Frank's email on the table. "Second, the HOA has no authority to issue fines for anything that happens outside of HOA property. I've reviewed our bylaws thoroughly. Nowhere does it give the association power over neighboring lands." A hush fell over the room. Richard Cooper picked up the papers, squinting as he read them. "A broken bar seems to have a point about jurisdiction, Evelyn," he said slowly. But Evelyn wasn't backing down. "That's where you're mistaken, Mason. Those trails have been part of our community resources for over a decade. We've maintained them, built on them, and our residents enjoy them daily. Whether or not some absentee owner is listed on the deed is beside the point." Marcus chimed in with a concerned nod. "Plus," he added, "the presence of firearms so close to our homes is a serious safety concern, especially for families with children." The room buzzed with murmurs, as more residents chimed in with recycled talking points about property values and neighborhood safety. Jessica Parker stood dramatically and said, "I moved here because it was safe. Now I'm scared to let my kids play outside with men carrying rifles in the woods." I tried to explain that hunting season was short and that I followed every safety regulation to the letter, but the tide had turned. The narrative had already been written. Eventually, Evelyn brought in Officer Mike Davis, a local police officer and resident of the community. He reviewed my license, my documents, and shook his head. "As far as hunting laws go, he's in full compliance," Officer Davis said matter-of-factly. "And if he has permission from the landowner, There's no trespassing issue either. This would be a civil dispute if anything between the HOA and the property owner. That should have been the end of it. But with Evelyn, things were just getting started. The conversation should have ended with Officer Davis's confirmation, but Evelyn wasn't backing down. "This isn't just about legalities, Mike," she snapped. "It's about the standards we uphold in Green Valley and the safety of our families. The HOA has every right to enforce those standards." The fine stands. As the meeting wrapped up, Evelyn shot me a cold stare. "You have 30 days to pay the fine, Mr. Holloway. Refuse, and we'll place a lien on your property and take legal action." I didn't flinch. "I won't be paying a fine with no legal foundation," I said firmly, "and I suggest the board consult a real estate attorney before issuing threats." On my way out, I passed the information table and something caught my eye, a glossy brochure titled Green Valley Trails. I picked it up and froze. The map inside showed Frank's entire property labeled as Green Valley Nature Trails. There was no indication that the land was privately owned. That night, I called Frank Williams again. "They're using my land?" he said, stunned. "I never gave anyone permission to build trails, let alone install benches." "No wonder my property taxes keep rising." He sounded worn down, burdened. "Honestly, I've been thinking about selling. The medical bills are piling up, and I could use the money." A thought sparked. "Frank," I said, trying to sound casual, "if you're serious about selling, I might be interested." "What price are you thinking?" As we discussed terms, a plan began to form in my mind, a way to stop Evelyn in her tracks. Later that evening, while researching land rights, I made a jaw-dropping discovery. The HOA wasn't just trespassing, they were actively planning to turn Frank's land into the Evelyn Richardson Nature Park without his consent. I found permit applications filed by the HOA for preliminary development of a community park. They had submitted environmental surveys, applied for state grants, and hosted fundraisers all for land they didn't own. Attached were glossy renderings showing walking trails, picnic areas, and a grand stone sign at the entrance reading, "Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, a Green Valley Legacy." Their audacity was staggering. The next morning, I contacted Amanda Lewis, a seasoned real estate attorney recommended by a colleague. After reviewing my documents, she shook her head. "This is a broken bar unique," she said carefully. "What they're doing looks like an attempt at adverse possession, but they haven't met the legal standards. In Washington, they'd need to use the land openly, continuously, and without permission for at least 10 years. Plus, they'd need to pay the property taxes, which, clearly, Mr. Williams has been covering. Planning a park with signage and structures? That's not casual use, that's overreach." When I mentioned I was planning to buy the land, Amanda smiled. "That would certainly be an elegant solution. Let's make sure it's airtight." While Amanda worked on the paperwork, strange things started happening. My garbage bin stayed at the curb, uncollected. Anonymous notes began appearing on my windshield. "Animal killers aren't welcome in Green Valley." Neighbors who used to wave now turned away. Sarah told me Evelyn had been whispering warnings at school events. "Keep your kids away from that man on Maple Street." The message was clear: conform, or be cast out. Meanwhile, I was quietly finalizing the purchase of Frank's 80 acres. He initially asked $800,000, but we eventually settled on $750,000, still a hefty price. Nearly everything I'd saved, including part of my grandparents' inheritance. But I saw it as an investment in land, and in freedom. Amanda moved quickly. We scheduled the closing for the following week. In the meantime, the HOA doubled down. I received 3 more violation notices: one for leaving my garbage cans out too long, another for my truck being parked in my own driveway for over 24 hours during a business trip, and a third with added late fees on the original hunting violation. Following Amanda's advice, I kept every notice but didn't respond. Sarah remained my eyes and ears inside the community. "She's holding secret meetings," she reported one evening, "and there's a fundraiser next month, invite only, minimum donation, $1,000. She's especially cozy with Daniel Thompson from the city council." Daniel Thompson, a politician with a reputation for championing local development, was a red flag. Evelyn was likely trying to grease the wheels for her illegal park. I also noticed Trevor Adams, Evelyn's husband, An architect surveying the land one afternoon with equipment in hand. When he saw me watching, he froze. He knew, they all knew something big was coming, but so did I. As I watched from the edge of the woods, Trevor Adams quickly gathered his equipment and left without a word. His hurried exit confirmed he'd seen me. I later confirmed that his firm, Green Vision Consulting, was listed as the lead design firm on the Hose Park development application. It was all starting to make sense. This wasn't just some neighborhood beautification project. It was a meticulously planned land grab, centered around Evelyn's desire for legacy and control. By the end of that week, Evelyn and Marcus returned to my doorstep. This time, they carried a formal notice. The HOA intended to sue me unless I paid the now $5,700 in fines, inflated by late fees. "This is your final warning, Mason," Evelyn said, her voice oozing with faux concern. "We don't want to escalate this, but the community standards must be upheld." Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed, trying to look intimidating. "The board voted unanimously to pursue legal remedies if you continue to be non-compliant," he added. I nodded calmly. "Understood. You'll have my response within 48 hours. Evelyn blinked, visibly caught off guard by my sudden cooperation, but she quickly recovered, flashing a smug smile. "Glad to see you're finally coming around. Maybe now you understand how things work in Green Valley." If only she knew what was coming. The next day, the sale went through. Amanda finalized everything with impressive speed, and by that afternoon, I held the deed to Frank Williams' 80 acres. The land Evelyn had been casually treating as her own now legally belonged to me. That night, sleep was impossible. I kept replaying the look I expected to see on Evelyn's face when she realized everything had changed. At exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, my doorbell rang. Right on cue, Evelyn stood there, immaculately dressed in a sharp blue blazer and white pants, unfazed by the light drizzle. Marcus stood behind her, clutching a leather folder no doubt containing their legal threats. "Good morning, Mason," Evelyn greeted crisply. "I assume you've had time to reconsider your position regarding the HOA violation?" Her tone was full of expectation and authority. I smiled and stepped aside. "Actually, I do have something important to discuss." "Please, come in." They followed me to the living room, clearly puzzled by my friendly demeanor but too proud to show it. Evelyn sat down and immediately seized control of the conversation. "Before you launch into whatever excuse you've prepared," she said smoothly, "you should know we've already filed paperwork with the county court. If you're ready to settle today, we can withdraw it." I remained composed. "That's very interesting," I said, sliding a folder across the coffee table. "But I think you'll want to see this first." Evelyn opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the deed to Frank's property and now my property, along with a detailed survey clearly showing the boundaries. The hunting incident, the trails, the benches, it all fell within that land. "As of yesterday afternoon," I said, "I am the sole legal owner of the land where the so-called violation occurred. And more importantly, I now own all the land on which the HOA has been illegally developing your little park." Evelyn's face drained of color. She flipped through the papers, eyes scanning frantically. Marcus leaned in, visibly rattled. This can't be right," she muttered. "The community has used those trails for over a decade. We have established rights of adverse possession." I shook my head. "My attorney has reviewed the case. You don't qualify. The HOA never paid property taxes, never had permission explicit or implied, and Frank Williams was never notified of your development plans. In fact," I continued, "we have evidence that the HOA deliberately avoided contacting the rightful owner while moving forward with substantial development. That alone raises serious questions of fraud, misrepresentation, misuse of fundraising." Marcus looked pale, tugging nervously at his collar. "Evelyn, maybe we should talk to legal before." Evelyn cut him off with a sharp glare. "This changes nothing," she snapped, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "The community has maintained and improved those trails for years. The court will recognize that." "You're welcome to make that argument," I replied coolly. "But in the meantime, as the legal owner, I am formally demanding all HOA activity on my property cease immediately. That includes trails, benches, bird feeders, and any other installations. You have 7 days to remove them." I slid another document across the table. This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney regarding the fraudulent use and promotion of the property as a public park. Any continued activity will be met with legal consequences. The cease and desist letter detailed the immediate halt of all park development activities. All fundraising efforts and permit applications were to be withdrawn at once. Evelyn shot to her feet, her calm fully tilde Section 8 cracking. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she snapped. "I built this community from the ground up. Everyone here respects my vision. One outsider waving a deed around isn't going to change that. The HOA board supports me completely." I stayed seated, locking eyes with her. "That may be true," I said coolly, "but the law supports me. And unlike HOA rules, property law is enforced by people you can't control." They left in a huff, Evelyn practically storming across my lawn, Marcus scrambling to keep up. I watched from my window as they made a beeline to Jessica Parker's house, no doubt to begin their spin campaign. Within hours, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Emergency home meeting called for 7 p.m. tonight. Everyone's talking about you buying the hiking land. Evelyn is losing it." By the afternoon, I had ordered private property and no trespassing signs and hired a contractor to install them along the perimeter the next day. Just as I was preparing for the evening meeting, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Emily Chen, a reporter from the Valley Chronicle. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Emily Chen. We received some tips about a dispute between you and the Green Valley HOA. Would you care to comment?" Her directness was a refreshing change from the usual neighborhood backbiting. I welcomed her and shared my side of the story carefully, avoiding anything defamatory. Emily took thorough notes, occasionally raising her eyebrows in disbelief. "So let me get this straight," she said. "You legally purchased land the HOA has been using without permission for years, and they planned to build a park named after their presidento without even consulting the actual owner?" She shook her head. "This is definitely a story." Just before I left for the meeting, a frail older man approached my porch. "I'm Robert Jackson," he said softly, glancing over his shoulder. "Retired accountant. Been in Green Valley over 20 years. I need to talk to you about Evelyn, and the land you bought." Inside, Robert revealed that he had once served on the HOA board. Years ago, when they discovered the land was privately owned, Evelyn had told them to drop it. She said finding the real owner would complicate things. Said we'd eventually get the land through adverse possession. I resigned after that. Told her it was unethical, but she's been running the show ever since. Even more shocking, Robert hinted at financial irregularities. They've been collecting special assessments for 3 years supposedly for trail upgrades, but the numbers don't add up. When I questioned the budget last year, I was told the detailed financials were confidential due to ongoing negotiations. It wasn't just overreach anymore. What Robert was describing sounded like fraud. As he stood to leave, he gripped my arm. "Be careful. Evelyn doesn't lose gracefully. She and her husband have friends in all the right places." What Robert had given me wasn't just legal ammunition, it was leverage that could unravel Evelyn's entire operation. That night, the emergency home meeting played out like a small-town courtroom drama. The community center was packed. Some people I'd barely spoken to in the 2 years I'd lived there now watched me like I was public enemy number one. Evelyn stood front and center, her professional mask firmly in place, though the tension in her eyes gave her away. "This emergency meeting concerns a matter that affects us all," she began. "Mr. Holloway has purchased the land adjacent to our neighborhood, a land that has been the heart of our nature trails for over a decade. He now intends to cut off access, undoing years of community investment." Murmurs spread across the room. Evelyn continued, painting me as a selfish outsider who didn't value community. Marcus stood beside her, nodding dutifully at every claim. Then her husband, Trevor Adams, stepped forward and unveiled glossy posters of the proposed Evelyn Richardson Nature Park. Walking trails, a playground, a quaint amphitheater. It was a full-on public relations campaign. "All of this," Trevor said somberly, "is now in jeopardy. Years of work and fundraising potentially gone because one man refuses to support the greater good." When I was finally handed the microphone, the crowd wasn't exactly friendly. Still, I kept my voice calm and steady. "I understand everyone's concern," I began, "but there are some facts you all deserve to hear. A broken bar. You should all know a few facts," I began, steady and measured. First, the land in question has always been privately owned. The HOA never contacted the previous owner before constructing trails or installing benches. Second, the park plans shown tonight were developed without any legal rights to the property. And third, and most importantly, the fundraising done for this project was conducted under false pretenses. The HOA never had a legal claim to the land. The room erupted. Outrage, confusion, and disbelief clashed in a chorus of angry voices. Some demanded answers about their donations, while others accused me of tearing down a beloved community space. Amid the chaos, I noticed Nancy Roberts, the HOA secretary, watching with an odd look, and not anger, but something more like fear. She avoided my gaze. Meanwhile, Richard Cooper, the treasurer, looked rattled, whispering anxiously to Marcus and fumbling through his paperwork. As the meeting dissolved into shouting and scattered arguments, Sarah found me near the exit. "That was intense," she whispered. "But people are starting to talk. Some of the longtime residents are asking questions about the money. No one seems to know how much was collected or where it went." She hesitated. "I think Nancy knows something. She's been acting strange ever since the project started. Maybe you should talk to her." Over the next few days, my no trespassing signs went up around the perimeter of my land. By the second day, nearly half had been removed or vandalized, just as I suspected. But I was ready. I'd installed trail cameras at key points, and they captured clear images of Marcus Bennett and other HOA members trespassing at night, yanking signs from the ground. That footage would prove valuable later, but my focus had shifted to the financial questions Robert had raised. With help from Amanda Lewis, I filed public records requests for all HOA financial documents tied to the nature park project. While waiting for those, I reached out to Nancy Roberts under the guise of discussing the vandalism. She was reluctant, clearly scared, but finally agreed to meet at a coffee shop 2 towns over, far from any curious neighbors. "I can't be seen with you," she whispered when we sat down. "Evelyn has eyes everywhere." Nancy's confession was exactly what I needed. As HOA secretary, she had access to the financial records, including those from the special fund created for the park. Over $75,000 had been collected from residents in the past 3 years. Large chunks of that money were funneled to a company called Green Vision Consulting for design and environmental assessments, always under vague terms. Every payment was signed off by Evelyn alone, bypassing the board's normal approval process. "And who owns Green Vision Consulting?" I asked, though I already had a strong guess. "Trevor Adams," she confirmed, "Evelyn's husband." "And Patricia Bennett, Marcus's sister." No competitive bids, no oversight, just insider contracts, justified under a loophole for specialized services. Nancy slid a flash drive across the table. "I've been making copies." I wanted to speak up, but Evelyn threatened my job. Her law firm represents the school district, and she's close with the superintendent. With that evidence in hand, I contacted Detective Alex Morgan from the county sheriff's office. He specialized in financial crimes and, after reviewing the files, agreed there were clear grounds for a preliminary investigation. "This goes beyond a dispute over land," he said. "If they solicited donations for a park on land they never owned, and funneled funds to a company owned by the board president's family, there are serious legal implications." As the investigation began discreetly, Evelyn turned up the pressure. Protesters appeared outside my house with signs reading "Save Our Trails" and "Community Over Selfishness." Local social media lit up with attacks on my character. Sarah called in a panic. Her principal had pulled her aside, warning that her friendship with me might affect her contract renewal. The intimidation campaign was spreading. Emily Chan's article soon ran in the Valley Chronicle, presenting a fair summary but asking tough questions about the park funding and HOA operations. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. They were threatening a defamation lawsuit and demanding $100,000 in damages, accusing me of fabricating financial allegations to distract from my own supposed misconduct. That same evening, Detective Morgan called. "We've reviewed preliminary bank records," he said without ceremony. "Green Vision Consulting received $68,000 in the last 3 years. Their only client, the HOA. And based on standard rates, the services billed should have cost a third of what they charged. We're moving ahead." At the next HOA meeting, Evelyn appeared tense but defiant. She stood before the room and launched her defense. "We will not be intimidated by baseless accusations," she declared. "Mr. Holloway is simply trying to divert attention from his own violations by attacking those who have given so much to this community." But the cracks in her authority were beginning to show. "Rest assured, the board will vigorously defend itself against these baseless attacks," Evelyn declared. But as she spoke, I noticed several residents exchanging skeptical glances. The polished veneer was beginning to crack. Evelyn must have felt it too, because she abruptly shifted gears so her eyes locked onto mine with cold intensity. "You've made a serious mistake, Mason," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "When this is over, you won't just lose this battle, you'll regret ever moving to Green Valley. I'll make sure of it." The public threat, made in front of dozens of witnesses, was the final push I needed. As I walked out, I knew the time for plain defense was over. What Evelyn didn't realize was that in 24 hours, she'd be the one facing serious consequences. The next morning, I invited journalist Emily Chen to my home for an exclusive. When she arrived, I handed her a carefully organized stack of documents, financial records tracing HOA payments to Green Vision Consulting, incorporation filings revealing the company's owners Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett, misleading fundraising materials, and statements from Frank Williams and Robert Jackson confirming the HOA had knowingly bypassed the legal owner. I also played the audio of Evelyn's threat and showed written witness accounts from residents who heard it. "This is a broken bar substantial," Emily said, her eyes wide as she flipped through the evidence. "And Detective Morgan is already investigating?" I nodded. "He's treating it as a financial crimes case, not just a neighborhood squabble. I believe he's interviewing board members today." She promised to publish a preview of her article online that evening, a perfect timing for the special home meeting Evelyn had called to discuss defamatory attacks. Meanwhile, Amanda and I prepared the next move. We drafted a formal letter addressed to every resident of Green Valley, detailing the financial irregularities and misuse of donations. The letter included trail camera photos of board members vandalizing my property, an itemized breakdown of the money collected for the park, and how much had been funneled into Green Vision Consulting. At the end, I made an offer. I would create a legitimate, insured community trail on part of my land if the current HOA leadership stepped down and new transparent financial controls were adopted. By late afternoon, word spread quickly. Detective Morgan had been seen visiting the homes of Richard Cooper and Nancy Roberts, presumably collecting statements. Several residents reported receiving last-minute calls from Evelyn, urging them to attend the evening meeting to stand united against outside attacks. But her support was already crumbling. John Peterson, a retired banker who had donated $5,000 to the park fund, was furious and actively rallying neighbors. Cynthia Milra, once one of Evelyn's strongest allies, publicly called for a full audit of all HOA funds. That evening's meeting was unlike anything Green Valley had ever seen. The community center was overflowing, with dozens standing outside or crowding into hallways. Evelyn arrived with Trevor and Marcus, visibly tense but trying to maintain control. She attempted to open the meeting, but the crowd erupted before she could finish her first sentence. "Is it true you funneled home money into your husband's company? Why didn't you tell us the land didn't belong to us?" Questions came fast and loud. Evelyn tried to shout over the noise. "These are malicious fabrications. Mason Holloway is manipulating you all for his own agenda." Yes, Green Vision Consulting provided services, but they were documented and approved by the board. Trevor's involvement changes nothing. That only triggered more uproar. "But you never disclosed the conflict of interest," shouted Richard Cooper, breaking ranks. "I signed those checks because you said everything was legitimate." The room fell into chaos. And then, without warning, District Attorney William Hayes walked in, flanked by Detective Morgan. They stood quietly at the back, watching. Evelyn's composure finally snapped. "This is ridiculous," she screamed, slamming her palm on the podium. "Everything I've done was for this community. If I bent some rules, it was for the greater good. Would you rather have some gun-toting outsider control your access to nature?" The room fell silent, and then, in a quiet but clear voice, Nancy Roberts stood from her seat in the corner. "That's not true, Evelina, and you know it." Her voice shook, but she stood tall. "You deliberately hid the truth about the land, Nancy said. "You pressured the board into approving payments to Trevor's company without proper oversight. You even threatened my job when I asked questions. This was never about the community, it was about building a legacy for yourself using other people's money." The room exploded. Cries for Evelyn's resignation echoed from every corner. Marcus tried to step in, but even he seemed uncertain. Trevor stayed silent, pale and stunned, watching the empire his wife had built begin to collapse. District Attorney Hayes approached the podium and calmly asked Evelyn to step aside. "In light of the investigation," he said, "the association should consider appointing temporary leadership." But Evelyn wasn't ready to go quietly. "I will not be stepping down," she snapped, glaring across the crowd. "These accusations are defamatory, and anyone spreading them will be named in our lawsuit. This community needs strong leadership now more than ever. I won't abandon my post just because one disgruntled resident has an agenda." She gathered her things and stormed out, Trevor and Marcus trailing behind. Afterward, residents approached me, some with questions, others with apologies or quiet words of support. Sarah, still filming, gave me a thumbs up across the room. Emily Chen, who had arrived mid-chaos, was already interviewing residents for a follow-up piece. Hayes and Detective Morgan pulled me aside. "This has gone far beyond a homeowner dispute," Hayes said. "We're now looking at wire fraud, misuse of funds, and abuse of authority. We're treating this very seriously." Later that night, I received an anonymous text. "Valley Self-Storage A Unit 23, getting emptied tonight. Documents being moved. Thought you should know." I immediately called Detective Morgan. By morning, officers had intercepted Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett at the unit, caught trying to remove financial records. Their desperate attempt to erase evidence only made the case stronger. Evelyn had once vowed to destroy my life, but now it was hers that was unraveling, and entirely by her own actions. Still, she had one last move to play. 2 days later, she made it. Through social media and email, she announced a community trail preservation walk, a glorified mass trespass onto my property. "Join your neighbors in reclaiming our beloved trails." The message read, "Bring kids, grandparents, cameras, show Mason Holloway he can't steal what's ours." It was a stunt, an attempt to paint me as the villain, a one-man blocking families from their land. But I was ready. First, I informed Detective Morgan and the sheriff's office. Then, with Amanda's help, I formally designated my land as a private wildlife reserve, fully permitted, properly marked, and protected by law. I reinforced the fencing, posted clear signage about conservation laws and trespassing penalties, and added a legal entry gate with an informational kiosk. On Saturday morning, Amanda and I stood at that gate, camera in hand. Right on cue, Evelyn arrived with around 30 supporters, signs in hand. "Trails for all and our land, our rights." She wore brand new hiking gear and carried a walking stick she clearly didn't know how to use. "This is outrageous," she declared for the cameras. "We've used these trails for decades. These fences are legal." But before she could step forward, 3 sheriff's vehicles pulled up. Deputies got out, Detective Morgan leading them. "This is private land," he said firmly. "The owner has reported trespassing and vandalism. Anyone crossing the line today will be arrested." He looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Richardson, organizing this event may be used as further evidence in your case." Evelyn's face flushed deep red. "This is absurd." "Marcus, tell them." But Marcus stayed quiet. Then he turned and walked away. One by one, the rest followed, heading back to their cars. "You're all giving up?" she shouted. "After everything I've done." But those words now landed differently. People had learned the truth. Within days, formal charges were filed, with Nancy Roberts and Richard Cooper cooperating and the documents from the storage unit in custody. The DA charged Evelyn, Trevor, and Patricia with fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of HOA funds. Over $68,000 had been stolen or used for vacations, home renovations, and personal perks. The HOA board was disbanded by emergency vote. Sarah Johnson was elected interim president. Her first act, ordering a full audit and establishing strict rules for transparency. The remaining board members publicly apologized to me and the entire community. Richard Cooper resigned, admitting he never double-checked Evelyn's claims. "I kept my word. With proper permits and care, I built a real community trail on a portion of my land. I named it the Frank Williams Memorial Trail after the original owner. A small plaque at the entrance shared his story and reminded all visitors to respect both nature and rightful ownership. Evelyn, Trevor, and Patricia took plea deals to avoid trial. They received suspended sentences, probation, and were ordered to repay over $100,000 in total. All three were barred from managing any nonprofit or HOA for 10 years. A month later, they sold their home and left Green Valley quietly. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere had changed. Sarah ran it with common fairness. The room voted unanimously to approve a new access agreement for the trail, complete with insurance and conservation guidelines. "This," Sarah said, "is what real community looks like." Walking home, I thought about how much had changed. I still hunt on my land, but now, with full support from my neighbors. The HOA still exists, but now it serves people, not power. And the $75,000 Evelyn repaid? At my suggestion, it became a scholarship fund for students studying ethics and leadership. Sometimes, losing something shows you what truly matters. The HOA lost its grip and found its honesty. As for me, I found something far better. A real community. And Evelyn? Last I heard, she's renting an apartment. No HOA. Fitting.